Chapter 3. Charles Sawyer walked through the double doors and down the hallway. Turning at the end, he headed towards the office, and once he got there, he grabbed the doorknob, rotated, and swung open the door. As soon as he was over the threshold, he closed it as quickly as he could. "Charles?" He turned, immediately recognizing the voice. "You know, if you want to come into my office, you could just knock. You don't have to barge in every time." He took no notice to this. Instead, he turned from the door and walked over. Looking his partner in the eye, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, placing it on the desk in front of him.
"Can you explain this to me? Or does everything we do here just go over my head?"
The man behind the desk glanced down at the piece of paper as Charles took his hand off it. As the words at the top of the page were revealed to him, he sighed, dropped his pencil, and leaned back in his chair. "Listen, Charles, I can't help it if the trials weren't successful."
"Of course you can help it. Aren't you running the damn things? Don't give me that bullshit, Christopher. You know as well as I do what is at stake here."
The man made his way around the desk and towards the chair, stopping just short at the point in which Christopher would have to physically move it back to make room for him.
"This is the third week in a row we have tried this thing, and it's the third time it's failed. What the hell is going on in that lab of yours? Is every person working under you a fucking first-year university student? Do they have any idea what the hell they are even doing?"
Christopher moved his eyes away from his partner and got out of the chair, turning a full 180 degrees to face the window behind the desk. There were a few moments of silence before he replied. "Charles, you have to remember what we are actually doing here. It's not like it's the easiest thing in the history of the world to do the things we are doing. You have to give it time." Charles Sawyer sighed then, and walked back around to the front side of the desk, heading towards the door.
"Well, we have to find a way to improve the way we handle things. Push those scientists of yours to the limit. I'm not going to waste this funding on failure. We may as well throw it out the window if that's what we're accomplishing with it."
He was about to turn around and open the door to the office, making his leave, but Christopher's movement stopped him in his tracks. As Charles's sentence had left his lips, his partner had turned from facing the window and had slammed both his hands down onto the desk. "Funding? You're concerned about funding? Charles, do you realize what we are doing here is illegal? My team and I are taking risks doing the things we do. We have to be constantly careful, erasing the tracks we leave, getting rid of the records, lying to people who don't know about this stuff, lying to our employer. Do you realize that if he found out what we were actually doing here, jail time would be the last of our worries?" Silence followed the outburst. Then calmly and quietly, Charles spoke his mind on the subject.
"You're concerned about Patterson?"
Those were the only words that were spoken. After, he simply looked at Christopher, shook his head slightly from side to side, then opened the door and walked out, leaving the man standing there, not knowing what to do next. The scientist sat back down and settled his gaze upon the piece of paper Charles had put there. Sighing, he pulled the chair back to the desk, picked up the pencil he had dropped, and re-began the work in front of him. He had decided to trust the batteries of the flashlight 10 minutes into the universe of darkness. Not that he had a choice in the matter. He had made his way around two of the hall's corners, and had not yet spotted any means of getting down to the first floor. He did, however, see a lot of splattered blood. Upon stumbling down the hall from the apartment, having to watch his balance with every step, he had been checking to see if he would trip over anything that had been thrown to the ground or placed in the way as a blockade. That part of the journey had been the successful one, but as soon as he had turned the corner into the next section of the seemingly endless apartment doors, it had been upon him. thrown across the wall in a snake-like pattern. One giant wave of dark-colored blood. Walking up to it, he had examined it to the best of his abilities, and discovered that it had turned from something dripping wet into a dry patch of its former self. The feeling of relief that had come over him as he had uncovered the truth was like the weight of the world lifting off his shoulders. The blood wasn't brand new, and that meant that one of the creatures outside, or even another survivor like him living in the building, hadn't just made a kill. He or it wasn't going to come around a corner at some random time and end his life. Overall, however, the examination proved to be something of a waste of time. Not only was the blood old and dried, but it was also beginning to fade. Soon after he had realized this fact, he had shone the light around, trying to find the body that the blood belonged to. He had found it, but also had almost shit his pants in the process. The corpse had proved not to be a great deal away. In fact, it was mere meters up the corridor and in the process of decomposing. Long, grey, stringy bits of flesh hung off the corpse, revealing a skeleton underneath covered in filth. Jack had stood there observing for a while after that, waiting for any noise, any action, anything in particular to confirm that he wasn't alone. There was nothing whatsoever. Only his breathing. Finally, his brain had clicked back into gear, and he thought it better that he venture forward and find the way through the maze. The sooner he got visibility on things, the better. Raising the knife once again to the ready position, the detective had walked down through into the next corridor. The blood in this one was much worse. It was everywhere. Long streaks, puddles, different kinds of patterns. It was all over the walls, the roof, the apartment doors. If Jack had spent his life in any other profession besides the police force, he thought he would have surely vomited continuously until there was nothing left to come out of him. Although, the way the alcohol was affecting him, somewhere inside him he wished he wasn't numb to the violence. If he threw up, it would certainly end the consistent dizzy spell a lot quicker. He shone the light around the floor again, trying to find any signs of a corpse or skeleton nearby. But the search proved to uncover nothing.
Okay, nothing. I can roll with that. That is, as long as I was right before and there's not some psychopathic murderer wandering the halls of this building. And if there is, well, let's just hope he's found a place of interest on the top floor and doesn't decide to come and bother me about what he wants for lunch. As for the possibility that it's one of those creatures, then I think the decision here would be to run like hell.
Jack presumed the man, if there was one, to be a cannibal. And even if the man wasn't a man, and it turned out to be one of those creatures, the police instinct he had developed over those 20 years had taught him to predict the worst rather than the best when the situation was as desperate as his. He observed the area once more, and as happy as he could be with a close-quarters weapon, a flashlight that's batteries could run out at any moment, and a head full of cloudy haze, he pressed on. As he made his way through the darkness, he had noticed that whenever his mind wasn't concentrating on something and he was just following the weak orange beam, it wandered into itself, and he would start daydreaming, just thoughts and images. He would picture himself walking out the door to the building and into the sunshine. All the people in the world would be standing there waiting for him. The whole thing had been a massive hoax. The creatures, the blood, the 44, all just a massive prank on him as a welcome back to the police force present. He would go back to the police station and be sent on another case. Drive home that night, sit in front of the TV, watch the news, have his dinner. And then he would remember that the thoughts weren't real, would be immediately snapped out of his fantasy and pushed back into the real world. After, he would be disappointed, sad almost, then would remember that if he wanted this to end, he could always walk back to the apartment, pick up the 44 that was lying on the table and blow his head off. He had almost done it a couple of times too, stopping in the hallway and looking back the way he had come.
Screw the creatures.
He would think, beginning back.
Screw the creatures. Screw this world, and screw everything about it.
But then he would remember that he heard the whispers say his name. He wasn't quite sure why or how, but thinking about that specific event forced him to go on. Was it the curiosity of it, perhaps? The basic human desire to find out exactly what it was? How it exists? Why it exists? Was it his survival instinct? Was his subconscious pulling him out of the thoughts because his brain wanted him to live, and the part that was producing the suicidal thoughts was physically being pushed back? Either way, the term curiosity killed the cat could very much be applied to at least half of his mind in the situation. Through these thoughts, however, he was always able to come back to the one question that had bothered him so much as he had begun his journey. Why had the whispers said his name? And why had it caused him to venture out? After all, it was only his name. They may be intelligent creatures. He never knew. Maybe a window had been left open in the apartment when the previous people had evacuated, and when Jack went to sleep, he would have nightmares, and in those nightmares he would say his name out loud, and the creatures down below could have heard that, and simply be copying. Like a parrot copies his owner's words. The parrot doesn't actually know what they mean, but because the animal has such a good ear, he learns and repeats, and he gets treats for repeating, so he learns that if he says the words his owner teaches him, he gets fed. Maybe those creatures say Jack's name, and survivors come, and the creatures feed. It's the same basic system, although Jack hadn't heard any screams of gunfire, and from where that apartment window was, he could look down into the street, and he never saw any bodies. But then again, he never saw any creatures either.
I never see any creatures either.
The thought had caused him to stop in the middle of the hallway and lower the flashlight.
There's never been any creatures. I would have had to have looked out there dozens of times. I hear the whispers, and I see nothing.
The thought had never occurred to him before.
Why have I never thought of why they weren't there?
Jack was baffled. Words left him. Standing alone in the darkness, the torch lowered to his side, he tried to remember seeing anything, and then yet another thought occurred to him, one that shocked him so much he nearly had to sit down. The thought was uncharted territory, something he had never thought possible because it wasn't possible. It defied the very laws of nature which the world obeyed by.
What if the creatures... What if they were invisible?
He couldn't come up with another reason as to why he had heard the sounds and never seen them. Leaning against the wall and closing his eyes, he tried his best to pull up a memory of the creatures. He didn't care what part of the body, the leg, the arm, the head. He just needed something to confirm that they weren't invisible. He needed anything.
They can't be. They just can't be. I must have seen them. Once, twice, 3 times? It's the alcohol, that's all. It's clouding my memory. I'm not thinking straight. There must have been a time, even once. I know I have seen them. I know I have.
Diving inside his mind, much like he had the first time while in the apartment, the answer came to him, and it was the answer he was looking for. The first sound of the memory were 2 gunshots. 2 gunshots from his .44 Magnum revolver.